Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is Bloomberg Businessweek with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
Well, she's a woman of the world, and God, she knows it.
Okay, so how's this for a little career advice, Carol? Think of yourself as a growth stock, okay? Mm-hmm. It's like NVIDIA. That's a growth stock.
Mega
Fair
growth.
to say?
Yes.
Embrace steering through skids. So kind of embrace the moments where you feel like you're kind of getting off your path and steering out of control.
Right.
Beware of managers who keep you from growing. So if you're good at your job, your manager might keep you in that place, and then you're not going to grow and do other stuff, which I think is a really important trap to watch. How about not faking it until you make it?
This one I want to dig into. That one kind of blows my mind because we talk about the difference between men and women and faking it till you make it. Those are just some of the tips from the new book written by our next guest, which, by the way, know a thing or two about climbing the corporate ladder. Between them, they have got decades of experience in senior positions at United Airlines, Kraft Foods, Gillette, Motorola, McKinsey, and more.
Grace Puma is the former chief operations officer at PepsiCo, and Christiana Smith-Shee is the former president of the consumer direct division at Nike. The new book, it's called Career Forward, Strategies from Women Who've Made It. Grace joins us from Tampa, Florida, and we got Christina from Portland, Oregon. Good to have you both with us this afternoon. So Grace, I just want to start with you, and we're going to get to the book in just a second, but we got to talk about the consumer space because the two of you have just so much experience when it comes to working for companies that go directly to consumer, companies that have relationships with consumer. And we talk about the consumer all the time powering this economy. Grace, what out there is interesting to you about the consumer space or in the consumer space right now?
Well, I think the consumer is going through, some challenging times right now. For one thing, they're certainly dealing with this economic uncertainty. And so the shifts in what they're buying and how they're spending their money is certainly a factor. But you're also really seeing people start to get a little more nervous about their job security. And I think that factors as well into how consumers are thinking about their purchases.
Christiana, come on in on that as well, and your take on the consumer. You guys really do have an incredible vantage point in terms of what you've seen and how you think about the space and where it's going.
Well, obviously everyone's got their own opinions. I would say from what I see on a day-to-day basis, the consumer is still voting with their dollars for brands they love. So if there was ever a time to make sure that, from a brand point of view, you were connecting with your consumers and you were projecting the image that you wanted, that time is now.
Well, and I think about, when it comes to brands too, Grace, let me go back to you, if we may, in just the importance of women and thinking about women purchasing and their purchasing power or their purchasing power for their families. And I do wonder how you both, okay, so that's kind of just in terms of the brand approach, but how you guys have thought about your own specific experiences and whether or not there were commonalities that you found between each other in terms of what worked. So Grace, start there. As you guys were starting to put this book together, the commonalities you found, the differences you found in kind of your way forward.
Yeah, this book kind of got birthed out of the fact that we had met when we were both on a corporate board. And one day we went out after the meeting and really connected. And it connected around identifying that although we took very different paths to achieve what we achieved, some of the top levels in different corporations, we had some of the same learnings and some of the same truths. And then you add to that we both have, it's hard to call them millennial children, but children that are now in their 30s and having their own career paths. And we really wanted to transfer the knowledge and the learning that we felt really could be helpful as they set their own path.
I should note that you guys are still on some pretty interesting boards. Grace is on the board of Target, among others. Christiana on Columbia Sportswear, UPS, West Marine, to name a couple others. So, yeah, I mean, definitely still in the consumer space right now. No question.
Yeah, exactly. Christiana, so come on in too. Like, as you guys were putting together the book, what did you want to make sure was like kind of in the messaging here from your own experience?
Yeah, I think we had a really strong goal to address this moment in time, as well as just share, decades of career experience learning that Grace and I had. And as Grace said, even though her path was very much through some of the top corporate brands and companies. Mine was consulting for over 20 years and then a C-suite job at Nike. We had similar takeaways about how to build a career that you love and how to make it worth it. And when we first started writing the book, we were still in the pandemic. And there was, of course, all this talk about women falling out of the workforce because they couldn't, make the childcare life work balance work. And then there was quiet quitting, and there was just act your wage. There's so many things right now that show in this moment a need to talk about how you can still invest in yourself and still have a great career while meeting this moment and balancing all the other forces that are at work in your life.
Well, we want to get into some of the specifics, but I wonder, Grace, if I said luck, skill, timing, what was the most important thing in your career path?
That's a great question. I would probably say
can be all of it
skill.
Too. Skill.
Well, no, I think it's skill. And I think it's about not just, you're not born with the skill, okay? It's cultivating skill, reevaluating what the next skill or capability is needed or will be needed. So it's an ongoing commitment to learning. And we talk a lot about that in our book, and to read the tea leaves on what is necessary and valuable in those skill sets.
Same thing to you, Christiana.
Well, and if I could,
yeah, please.
Would you mind if, I was going to say, do you mind if I jump in on that?
No.
Going even a step further, what Grace and I believe is you can do a lot more than you think to create your own luck.
What do you mean?
And when we talk about people we see at work and we say, she's so lucky she got that project. He's so lucky that story hit right at the right time, whatever it is. But you roll the tape back, you realize they invested in building their network inside and outside the company. They invested in knowing things that are important at that moment in time. They demonstrated performance. That's when opportunities tend to come to you. And then we say the key is, do you hear the knock on the door when opportunity is knocking, and do you answer it, right? That's timing. So there's clearly serendipity in your career. There's no question. But you can do an awful lot to be in the right place at the right time through the steps that you take to invest in yourself.
Well, and some would say, I'm trying to think whether I want to think our leader or book or other books that about this whole idea of being the first one at the office, being the last one to leave. And sometimes you can't do that, but certainly early on in your career, people will move around and be like, who's here? Who can do this? You're here because you're here early and you're here late. And
Okay, but
it's as simple sometimes as something like that.
It is, but I'm wondering, and I want to go to you, Grace, first on this one. If in an era of hybrid and remote work, that is more of an issue, because you're not going to run into the boss on the Zoom. You're only going to run into the boss, at the water cooler if you're physically around the boss. And there's an entire generation really who graduated in the last 4 years that don't have the same idea of going to the office that I think a lot of us grew up with.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt. And certainly, during the time that we had been in a lot of our career, it was an opportunity, you're first in, first out. But today is very different. And, I definitely think, addressing the virtual world, there is still a need to ensure connection. And connection through work is really the best connection. But making sure that you're where you need to be and that you're contributing in those moments and that you're establishing relationships. You hear a lot of people in the hybrid work right now going out and even meeting with colleagues outside of work just to make sure they have a connection. But I think what you said earlier, we talk about this concept of growth stock. That's more important, I think, than the FaceTime. And
Really?
we talk about it. Yeah, I do. Because we talk about it in the book about, and let me just take a minute on it. If you think about a growth stock, you can think of any company that comes to mind. Let's take Apple, for example. They tend to grow at a much faster pace than their competitors. And they do that by reinventing themselves, by looking around the corner, by investing in the right things. So when you apply that to yourself, whether you're working virtually or in the office, you're going to adopt a mentality that says, I want to, no matter where I am, no matter how well I'm doing in my current job, I'm going to be thinking future forward, and I'm going to be cultivating and growing and investing in the type of things that I need to be able to learn and contribute at a higher rate. And those often lead to opportunities and career progression along your journey.
So, Christiana, it's kind of like, don't wait for someone to tell you what you need to do. Look around you and figure out what you need to do to either get to the next level or the next position or the next opportunity.
Yeah, we would definitely agree with that notion of staying curious, of thinking ahead, of planning a bit in terms of saying, hey, this year, what are my goals in terms of skills I'm going to need to build? What are my goals in terms of people I want to get to know? And in the spirit of meet the moment, we would also say make the most of the opportunities that you do have. So specifically in this hybrid and remote work environment, you may not, as Grace noted, have as many chances to just hang around the water cooler, but you're on Zoom all the time. There's one way you can approach those meetings like, oh, I got another Zoom. I'm going to turn off my camera. I'm going to be doing my email while the meeting's going until I hear them call my name, all that kind of thing. We've all been there. Those are really important opportunities. There are other people on that call, and there are other chances that you've got to show up. So we would just also say, make the most of the chances that you get. If you're in the room, you're there for a reason. Speak up, participate. That room nowadays may be virtual, but it's really important that if you're there, you're noted.
That's a really good point.
I do. I just think I talking to colleagues at other companies, people who work in other industries, like there's definitely a culture at some places where the camera's on or the camera's off.
That's really interesting.
Meetings. It's really interesting.
I've always kind of had it on, and like I've.
Oh yeah, this is a camera on culture.
Yeah, this is a camera on culture. We want to get back to the authors of a new book. It's called Career Forward: Strategies from Women Who Have Made It. The authors are Grace Puma, former Chief Operations Officer at PepsiCo, and Christiana Smith-Shee, former president of the Consumer Direct Division at Nike. One thing we wanted to get into is this idea of don't fake it till you make it. And the reason we bring it up, we had a conversation with the head of one of the divisions at one of the major cruise companies just on Friday. And this idea of when she got a big promotion that people were like, yeah, but you didn't have all the necessary experience. And she was like, yeah, you were kind of right. But I think about the difference, and forgive me, I don't like to make generalizations, but there has been a lot written about where men will be like, I got it, I'll figure it out. Women are like, oh my God, I don't have all the qualifications. Again, generalizations, but people have written about a lot of this. Grace, let me go to you first. Why do you guys say don't fake it till you make it? And what exactly do you mean? Because sometimes you don't have all the qualifications, but you can figure it out.
Yeah, there's when we think about fake it till you make it, we don't think that's a bad thing. We think it's a good thing. The reason is because you do whatever you need to do to gain the confidence as you go into a new business or a new environment or a new position. No one goes into a position when they know everything, okay, especially if you progress your career. So we think it's okay to stand up, whether you have to talk to yourself in the mirror or pump yourself up, but you're there for a reason. Believe you're there for a reason and have the confidence to know you're going to figure it out. You're going to learn things and you're going to be able to apply the talents you do have to be successful. That's very different than what you hear about imposter syndrome, where people say, hey, they got the job and they're not qualified. We think that's unhealthy. But fake it till you make it means, have the confidence that you're in that position or you've been given that opportunity for a reason, and have the faith that your past history will tell you that you'll learn and you'll achieve.
Yeah, Christiana, jump on in here and sort of share your experience with this and the way that you thought about it when you were writing about this in the book.
Yeah, the reason you might think we're saying don't fake it till you make it is because what we're saying is get past that thinking, right? You were put there for a reason. Your bosses aren't crazy. The people who hired you knew what they were doing, right? Learning what you need to learn to fill in your gaps in a new role is not faking it, right? That's being programmatic. That's being strategic. That's leaning into it. That's being forward thinking. So all we would say is don't fake it till you make it. Put a plan together to get the rest of what you need in terms of the experience, the skills, the confidence to do the new role that you were put in. But recognize that you are there for a reason in the meantime. And saying that I've got to learn and get down this learning curve in this new role is not the same as saying I'm an imposter and I don't belong here. We really, really dislike the phrase imposter syndrome because that leaves you no place to go. That doesn't give you a path forward, and that's not a very confidence building mindset.
You explore this idea in the book about making sure you're growing within a role. And you argue that you don't want to be too comfortable in a job. And I think for a lot of people, that can be kind of tough because, okay, well, they've worked so hard to get to a certain place and they're finally in that place. Why do they want to be necessarily longing for something more, Grace?
Yeah, so it starts with what we're trying to encourage people to do is to have and set a strategic path for your career and a cardinal direction. And a cardinal direction gets determined on what are your aspirations, and they can evolve over time. So to your point, we think it's important that if you're in a job and you feel like, I'm doing great, I might be getting great performance reviews, but you're no longer learning, then you have the obligation for yourself to meet your aspirations by continuing to look for opportunities to expand your capabilities and expand your contributions. And that can show up in a number of different ways. It might be raising your hand and saying, hey, I'd like to get involved in this particular project or this particular initiative that's outside my area, because you're going to know that you're going to grow through that experience. So that's kind of the basis of it. And it also is important, if you set a cardinal direction of what you want to aspire, that you're checking in with yourself and saying, am I on track? And does the job that I'm doing today continue to grow me and progress me on that journey?
Is it safe to say that, Christiana, there is a point that you get to that you might be like, I've outgrown either this company or this career trajectory. I've hit the top and it's just time to move on. And you just have to face that. Even as much as you might like the company, the people you work with, if you really want to advance, sometimes you've just got to leave. It's not just about making more money, but advancing.
Yes, we agree with the notion that if you want to keep growing, sometimes you have to go. And we call that a fork in the road. Mm-hmm. And sometimes those forks in your career path are forced on you by a company change of ownership or a leadership change in your management team, whatever. But sometimes it's because you're proactively realizing, like you said, that you have grown to a point where you need to do something different. And what we want to encourage you to do is be self-aware enough to actually recognize those moments when they come versus get surprised by them. And the way you can get surprised by them is if you don't go when you've kind of outgrown your current role. If you don't actually push yourself to get to something next or new, you could end up in what we call benevolent stagnation. And benevolent stagnation is, I'm still in the same job, I'm still performing, everybody's kind of taking me for granted. I've noticed I'm not seeing the same increases in my comp. I've noticed I'm not getting invited to some meetings. I've noticed I'm not being pulled into the cool projects. And we use the metaphor of a rocket in orbit, right? If you're in orbit around a planet, you still got to turn the gas on periodically or gravity is going to pull you down.
Love
and
that.
It is the same thing at a job. You got to grow or you got to go.
All right, Grace, Christiana, we only have about a minute left here. So just quickly, Grace, let me start with you. 30 seconds, some final thoughts here.
I think I would just encourage you to really embrace ambition and realize that ambition is a really good thing. It means you're going to create a path for yourself to achieve the best you can achieve. And it might be different for every person, but we would encourage people to do it because it's worth it, having a career.
Women especially, it's okay to be ambitious. I'm just going to put it out there. Christiana, 30 seconds here, your final thoughts.
Love owning the A word, as Grace said. The other thing we like to say to women in particular, but again, applies to everybody, is if you're not in the driver's seat of your career, somebody else is. And you can't get to a place you want to go to unless you're the one at the wheel. So we try to give you tools and ideas for how you could stay in the driver's seat of your career path.
Well, and that plays into also a chapter you guys have, Steer into the Skid, which I really love. I had to steer into a skid, and it was such a great opportunity that I ended up creating, but it didn't feel like it as I was going through it. So some great advice. Grace Puma, former Chief Operations Officer at PepsiCo. Christiana Smith-Shee, former President of the Consumer Direct Division at Nike. Their new book, Career Forward, Strategies from Women Who Have Made It. Thanks to you both. This is Bloomberg.